Good afternoon for the guests here in the class. Good morning to Matt, and good evening to all of you across the ocean. Our meeting today will be focused on two regions, which are vital for the understanding of the expansion of the Hasmonean polity and the Hasmonean kingdom itself. We will talk about the coast and about the Jezreel Valley. And we will start with Alexander Fantalkin. Alex is an associate professor of archaeology at the Department of Archaeology and Ancient Near Eastern Cultures in Tel Aviv University. He received his PhD in 2008 from Tel Aviv University. His research focuses on Near Eastern archaeology and history vis-a-vis the Aegean world in the first millennium BC. Among his publications are several monographs, such as the publication of Metzat Chashaviau and Tel Kudadi, edited books, and over 80 articles on various topics. Fantalkin directed and participated in many excavations, including Jaffa, Kiryat Ata, Beersheva, Yavne Yam, and many more. And since 2013, he is directing a large-scale archaeological project at the coastal site of Ashdod Yam. So, Alex, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Lee. Let's share the screen again. Let's see if it works. Share screen.
And before you start, please, everybody mute yourself so we can hear Alex.
Okay, and just tell me when I switch the slides if it's okay. Okay, so how much time do I have? 15, 20 minutes approximately, yeah? Something like this.
Yes. Yeah. You have.
Okay, so let's start.
You can ask.
Okay, so let's start with the lecture. The topic of my lecture, I will concentrate on the southern coastal plain, roughly the area between Tel Ashkelon and Jaffa, Tel Aviv. I'm not going farther south to Gaza area because it's a bit problematic in archaeological terms, of course. We don't know that much, although I can tell a few things about this later during the discussion if you want me to. But at the moment, I will not deal with Gaza region. So from Tel Ashkelon to, let's say, Yarkon River, and Yarkon represents a natural boundary for this region, which we used to call Philistia, basically. So first of all, take a look on the map. And already on the map, you can see this very prominent feature of location of the major harbor settlements, which are located at the distance of approximately 20 kilometers between them. And this is, of course, not by coincidence, because it corresponds to the need for a large number of shelters and this is stemmed from the fact that the sailors may need to wait for proper conditions or may try to escape bad weather conditions during the sailing along the coast. That is to say that even though the ancient mariners potentially could cover large distances in one day, even much larger than 20 kilometers, it was important to know for them where they can find a safe shelter within 2 or 3 hours of navigation because of the weather, which is approximately 10 nautical miles, so it's approximately 20 kilometers. So this is and we can clearly see the idea of this spatial configuration. Now I will start, because it's very brief, I will start with Ashkelon, and we'll slowly continue to the area of Jaffa, concentrating on major sites and concentrating on the 2nd century BC. So this is the idea of this presentation, basically. So here's the map which I borrowed from Uziad, a friend of mine, Dr. Uziad from the IAA. It was published in the book edited by Andrea and Cosmin about Middle Maccabees. And Uzi, I think, presented here an excellent picture of settlement, so-called settlement archaeology, with the results of major excavations and surveys. And I will concentrate mainly on the things on sites which are still unpublished, among them my site, Ashdod Yam, and we just submitted for publication the Hellenistic area. So at least I will present some material which was unknown to Uzi or to others. So let's start with Ashkelon, and Ashkelon, as we all know, was published recently, just a few years ago, in this beautiful volume produced by Ashkelon team, by Kathleen Burney. So, and for my part, I'm not going to show you, of course, the pottery from Ashkelon or any other finds. What is important to mention is that the Hellenistic sequence at Tel Ashkelon, at least according to Burney, continues from Persian through Hellenistic, through Ptolemaic and Seleucid and Seleucid period, and later there is a continuity into the 1st century BC, which we will not observe at additional sites, which I will mention. Here is the settlement that should be mentioned in particular. It is an Hellenistic settlement excavated by Chaimi and Peretz, located at the Barnea neighborhood of Ashkelon, 4 kilometers to the northeast of the Tel. It was established in the early 2nd century and abandoned around middle 2nd century BC. And I will return to this settlement later when I will summarize everything. Moving to the north, we have Tel Ashdod. Tel Ashdod, it's not on the coast. It's approximately 5.5, 6 kilometers to the east off the coast. And so it's not a proper coastal settlement. The coastal settlement is Ashdod Yam, Ashdod by the sea. And at Tel Ashdod, the Hellenistic remains were discovered mainly in area A. You can see it here in the middle of the Tel, featuring buildings of a new city plan oriented along the north-south axis, and several groups of buildings were divided by streets and interpreted by excavators, Moshe Dotan, as cities agora. The end of phase 3B, which is of interest to us, was dated by excavators to the late 2nd century BC, linking it to the Hasmonean conquest of Azotus. Conclusion was based on the destruction layer at the site, which produced the latest coin dated to Antiochus VII, Sidetes, thus providing a terminus postquem for the conquest of the city by Hyrcanus I. In Ashdod, however, we have a continuity, as we do have it in Ashkelon. So we have a continuity into the phase 3A, which in excavators' opinion relates to Hasmonean occupation. So there is a continuity in both major tales, but in Ashkelon, it has nothing to do with the Hasmonean occupation because Ashkelon was not conquered. In Ashdod, situation is different. So now we, before we move to to Ashdod Yam, not far from Ashdod, more recent investigations of the area around Ashdod should be mentioned, and this is of course the excavations of Elena Kogan Zahavi, near at the foot of Tel Ashdod, near Tel Ashdod, a few hundred meters from Tel Ashdod. And here the so-called Assyrian palace was found. But we are not talking now about 7th century BC, but 2nd century. And I'm showing you here one of the pottery kilns excavated by Daniel Varga. At least 5 pottery kilns were found here and dated by Daniel to 2nd century BC, and the dating seems reasonable. Similar pottery kilns were discovered at Tel Ashdod as well, in areas D and M, on the southern and eastern slopes of the Tel. So Ashdod is very important for us, and the kilns of Ashdod, of course, are very important for clarifying the picture of the 2nd century BC. Now let's move toward the coast. And so, as I said, approximately 5.5 kilometers to the west, right on the coast, we have this huge site, which is called Ashdod Yam, Ashdod by the sea. It's more than 2 kilometers from south to north, half kilometer east-west. My excavations were concentrated mainly on this area at the southern part of the site, which we called the so-called Acropolis. Of course, we also excavated a huge Byzantine basilica here in the northern part of the site, but I'm not talking here about the Byzantine basilica. So here we concentrated our efforts on the Acropolis, and what we found, Acropolis, we call it Acropolis, but of course you can call it as you wish, a hill, a mound. So it's a fortified compound with fortifications from the 8th, 7th century BC, and we have a huge, really huge fortification system in the late Iron Age here. But on top of this system, in the area of the Acropolis, we have the remains of the Hellenistic settlement from the 2nd century BC. And that's it. That's all we have here on the Acropolis. Only late Iron Age and Hellenistic, only 2nd century BC. So let's take a look on what we have here. These are our areas of excavations, and Hellenistic remains were discovered mainly in area A, A1, and area D. Here at the background, you can see Ashkelon. So this is the idea of this networking of 20 kilometers between different coastal sites. It's very prominent on this picture in particular. So this is the plan of major excavation remains, some of them from Iron Age, some of them from Hellenistic. Mainly we are dealing with the remains from area A, area A1, and area D, which belong to the 2nd century BC. So the most prominent feature, those are remains of a huge, colossal, monumental building, which we identify as fortress. It was not my intention to excavate the Hellenistic period there at all, so we invested a certain amount of time in one of the seasons into excavating this, at least partially. So what we have a huge outer wall of this fortress, this square fortress. I will show you the reconstruction in a minute. When the upper courses of this huge monumental wall were robbed in the antiquity, and only some lower courses remains in situ, and some huge pillars which were inserted into this huge monumental wall. Once the stones were robbed in the antiquity, the floors started to collapse into the robber's trench. So while excavating, here you see the section, so you see how the wall was robbed almost completely, but huge pillars still remained, and there is a physical connection between the pillars with the lower courses of this monumental wall. So the floors, they started to collapse into the robber's trench, and a variety of finds. This is how it looked during the excavation. So the upper courses were robbed, and the floors, as I said, started to collapse. And we found a lot of material which actually accumulated on the floors, but collapsed into the robber's trench, and some of the floors were excavated as well. This is one of the pillars, these monumental pillars of 8-10 tons, huge pillars, which were incorporated into this wall. Nearby, near this monumental fortress, there is a series of small buildings excavated by us in a poor state of preservation, but nevertheless, a series of buildings attached to the fortress, related to the fortress, maybe auxiliary forces, I will explain in a minute. This is how it looks like, and remains of this, let's say, mud brick fences or mud brick fortifications. Those mud brick walls, they stand directly on the sand without any stone foundation, and they encompass the perimeter around the fortress, creating a sort of military establishment, as we assume, judging from the finds. But this is how it looks like, these fences, which made of mud brick, which were created on top of the Iron Age fortifications, and they surrounded the main fortress. This is the view from above. and also along the perimeter, and you see all these collapses, mud brick collapses, which are very characteristic for earthquake, actually. And also, along the perimeter of the fortified line, where there were several watchtowers, what we call them watchtowers, and here too, in this watchtower in area D, for example, you can see this huge tilt in the section, and it seems like it's also was finally destroyed, the final destruction. It's because of the earthquake. No destruction layer was discovered on the floors of these buildings, and the watchtowers, they seem to be abandoned, but a very rich destruction layer with ashes and everything you can imagine was discovered in the fortress, in the monumental fortress, and I will show you in a minute. So this is our reconstruction of the fortress. This is how it looked like, probably, with a series of buildings and watchtowers, watchtower here, another watchtower was here, and the traces of these defensive walls made of mud brick, which were discovered here and there along the perimeter. In terms of finds, the finds are solely from the 2nd century BC. Of course, we have some coins from Ptolemaic period and even earlier from the late Persian, some silver issues, but they could stay in circulation for a long period of time. The vast majority of finds, I don't know in percentage right now, but almost 99.9%, it's all from 2nd century BC, from the early 2nd century BC to the late 2nd century BC. This is just to show you some pottery, and in particular this very interesting mold-made bowl, which is very unusual. You have hunting scenes which are actually not so unusual. They're rare, but not so unusual. But here, among the variety of animals, you can see also a bear, a standing bear, and this is really unusual. That's the first one that was found, I think, on this type of well-known pottery, of course. A variety of amphorae from all around the Mediterranean, from Italy, from Greece, Rhodes, Cnidos, Kos, and whatnot, all stamped handles from Rhodes. They also give us 2nd century, middle of the 2nd century, a little bit later, 30s of the 2nd century. So it goes quite well with the rest of the finds. In terms of coins, we have an enormous amount of coins, and based on the latest coins in the sequence, so we have all kind of Seleucid coins. Of course, we have earlier, as I mentioned, a few Ptolemaic issues, but most of them the Seleucid issues. But we don't have any Hasmonean coin, not a single one. We don't have early Roman ones from the 1st century BC. So it all stops somewhere toward the end of the very end of the 2nd century BC. Also, in terms of coins, it's important to mention that we have quite many coins from Arados, from Arvad, and we have quite many coins from Side in Asia Minor. And these coins in Side were already linked by some scholars, notably by Donald Ariel and others, to mercenaries in the service of the empire, of the Seleucid Empire. And we have here the same picture also with the coins from Side. Here's the example, number 17. Number 16 is from Arvad, from Arados. In terms of other military equipment, a lot of interesting items, but the most important ones would be, of course, this actually single one. We have many arrowheads, but pure, and here you see the variety. These are a little bit earlier, of course, 1, 2, 3, but these two are pure Hellenistic arrowheads, and we have this beta epsilon monogrammed bronze arrowhead, which are well known especially from Jabal Khalid. And so it also gives us the same idea of the second century military establishment. Also, a lot of peculiar finds like personal amulets in a very good state of preservation with organic material which was preserved, like with this one on number 10. We already published this one, and this one's still unpublished, 11. So we have military equipment. The Hellenistic remains, and we have also these stones, balistra stones, which remind very much those that are known from the same period, from Dor and from Tel Dor and from Jerusalem. It basically looks exactly the same from the siege of also on behalf of Antiochus VII. So it all goes into the same picture. The Hellenistic remains comprise then the ruins of a monumental stone-built fortress, likely constructed in the first half of the 2nd century BC and destroyed toward the end of that century in a significant conflagration. The use of spolia in form of marginally dressed stones suggests that there may have been early Hellenistic buildings nearby that they used for building material. Numerous artifacts that I've mentioned support the idea that it had a military function and was perhaps the location of a garrison. In terms of contemporary political environment, the establishment of the fortress and the component buildings in Ashdod Yam should be set in the first half of the 2nd century and viewed within the framework of illicit military activity. And now I move toward the north. How much time I still have, Roy?
You can go ahead.
Okay, so I'm moving north, Yavne Yam. Yavne Yam and this beautiful picture excavated by Moshe Fisher, late Moshe Fisher. But unfortunately, it is still unpublished, almost 20 seasons of excavations, only partially published, and maybe one day we will be able to produce a final report that would deal with the Iron Age remains all the way up to Hellenistic at least, and maybe also later periods as well. But I just submitted a very big article about Iron Age from these excavations for publication. It should be out this year. But for Hellenistic period, the major remains during Fisher's excavations were discovered here in Area A. And there are numerous Hellenistic remains which were dispersed along the coast, like these coastal wells, plenty of Hellenistic wells. Of course, the very famous correspondence between Antiochus V and Yavne Yam's Sidonian community, which was found also near Area A before Fisher's excavations. Somebody should turn off the microphone. This is how it looks now. The site slowly being destroyed because of the constant erosion, unfortunately. But here you see another Hellenistic well just pops out right on the coast. And Area A is located right here in the saddle. Between this promontory and the rest of the settlement. In terms of Fisher's excavations, where I participated when I was still student many years ago, I'm talking about 90s, yeah? The first season was 1992. There are pieces of architecture, floors, some buildings here and there, with signs of destruction again toward the end of the 2nd century. I'm not going to show you a huge amount of pottery that was discovered during these excavations, just show you a few clay boat models of Phoenician origin that come from Hellenistic context, which we just published. A group of us, former Fisher's students and colleagues, we just published a few months ago. So it comes also from Area A. Very rich material culture in terms of pottery. Again, amphora from all around Mediterranean, etc., and a destruction layer destroyed toward the end of the 2nd century, together, it seems, with Ashdod Yam and Tel Ashdod Phase 3B, but unlike Ashdod Phase 3B, in Ashdod Yam and Yavne Yam, there is no continuity into the 1st century BC, at least not in the areas which were excavated. Moving north, a few kilometers to the north from Nahal Sorek, from Sorek stream, not far from Yavne Yam, there is another very peculiar settlement called Tel Yaoz, excavated by Ras Kleter and Israel Roll, and published in a series of articles by Roll, Fisher, and Orenthal. Here we have a Persian period villa, house, whatever you call it, which continues into the Hellenistic period, but it does not continue into the 1st century BC, so just to mention it. And if we are in the area of Yavne Yam, and a very important Hellenistic settlement, let's call it the twin brother or twin sister of Barnea Ashkelon, is a settlement in Gan Sorek, excavated by Uziad, located 7.5 kilometers northeast of Yavne Yam. It reaches its greatest extent in the early 2nd century BC, and it was abandoned already in the mid-2nd century BC, more or less simultaneously with Ashkelon Barnea. So important to mention. Now I'm approaching to the end because it should be short, as you told me. We go to Jaffa, and Jaffa is always a mess. Why it's a mess? Because it's excavation inside the modern city. Yes, so there is a continuous occupation there, and anyone who excavated in Jaffa knows that it's virtually impossible to find an uninterrupted archaeological layer because you have so many people that came through this settlement. But it was summarized. The 1st millennium BC was summarized by Oren and myself already in 2008 or 7. We published this article, very big article in Ugarit Forschungen, navigating between the powers, Joppa and its vicinity in the 1st millennium BC, and also we presented the remains of Tel Aviv during the Hellenistic period. What I will show here is just a few things that maybe you don't know. They are still unpublished. There are many publications about Jaffa. Of course, Orit Zuf, a recent monograph, of course, everything that was done by Aaron Burke and Palstukel within the framework of Jaffa Cultural Heritage Project series, and numerous excavations of the Israel Antiquities Authority, plenty of remains for Hellenistic period in Jaffa. I excavated myself in Jaffa here. You see it here, outside of the Tel. Tel is here, the ancient Tel is here. I excavated here, a very big excavation many years ago. I admit my guilt that I published the Iron Age remains very quickly, but all the rest, including Hellenistic, Byzantine, Roman, Byzantine, Muslim, early Muslim, Crusader, Ottoman, it's Jaffa, yeah? It all wasn't published until recently, but now I submitted after so many years together with Itamar Taxel, we submitted a volume for publication of the later remains. And in my excavations, not surprisingly, as in many other excavations in the vicinity of Jaffa, we also found Hellenistic stratum with a lot of pottery, continuity from the Persian period all the way into the Hasmonean 3rd, 2nd, and 1st century BC, not surprisingly, based on the historical sources and archaeological picture that we know. There are some surprises just because here people like maybe some unpublished items. For example, this amphora number 9 with the monogram, stamped monogram, usually it is attributed to Cyprus, but it's very late Persian, early Hellenistic, but the NAA analysis shows that they are probably from Crete. So I don't know still how to deal with it, but it's just to show you something new at least. In any event, we found during my excavations there in Jaffa, we also found the remains of a iron smithy, very similar to what was already found by Kaplan during his excavations, and it's very similar to iron smithy, which was published recently from Akko So Hellenistic current Smithy, and the continuity, as I said, from Persian period all the way through Ptolemaic and the Seleucid and Hasmonean period, and contrary, for example, to Ashdod Yam, in Jaffa, we have quite many Hasmonean coins, also in my excavations included, so there is a clear continuity here. I will not talk about, not today, about Alexander Janneus' defensive line against Antiochus Dionysius in the area of Tel Aviv, so I said not today. It was published by Orenthal and myself, and we in these publications we try to refute what we call myth of so-called Alexander Janneus' defensive line. So those of you who know, those of you who don't know, you can read it, but it's already the beginning of the 1st century, so probably it's beyond the scope of this presentation. And now, to the end of this short presentation, the shift to this Seleucid rule in the areas of Jaffa, Yavne Yam, Ashdod, and Ashkelon was most probably smooth and, in a sense, purely administrative. Of course, I present here what I think is correct, and if you disagree, you can say during the discussion. It's not the ultimate truth here, it's just my view. The major cities, Jaffa, Ashdod, and Ashkelon, point to a continuity through the 1st century BCE. Both establishments in Gan Sorek and Barnea, Ashkelon, were interpreted by excavators as possible Katoikia, settled by Greek and or Anatolian veterans and their families, and I think this reconstruction is quite plausible. Their abandonment in the mid-2nd century BC could be related to the hostilities related to Judah's Maccabees campaigns. The remains of the relatively short-lived Hellenistic occupation in Ashdod Yam, detected so far in my excavations, and it is emphasized so far, because there is a good possibility that there are other Hellenistic remains just beyond the fortified area. It's a huge settlement. So detected so far only on the Acropolis, most probably represent a Seleucid mercenary garrison stationed there. And it is difficult to postulate under which Seleucid king exactly the establishment of this military stronghold may have been commissioned. It was most probably reinforced during the days of Antiochus VII Sidetes by his general, who was appointed in command of the seacoast and is said to have attacked Judea from Yavne Yam. The monumental stone building destruction at Ashdod Yam, the so-called fortress by fire, marked the end of the Hellenistic military settlement of Ashdod Yam in the late 2nd century BC, and coinciding with the destruction of Tel Ashdod phase 3B and the contemporaneous destruction at Yavne Yam. But there is no continuity here. In Ashdod Yam, we don't detect any continuity, unlike Tel Ashdod. It is likely that these events are related and can be attributed to the campaigns of John Hyrcanus I towards the end of his reign, although, of course, the beginning of Alexander's reign for this wave of destructions cannot be excluded as well. And here I think I've finished.
Thank you so much, Alex, for this electric presentation. We will move straight to Matt, and after Matt will finish his presentation, we can open the discussion. I see Gerald already have 10 comments on your talk. So Gerald, if you can please wrap your question into 1 or 2 questions, and we can start with you the discussion. So we are moving to Matthew Adams. Matthew is the director of the Center of the Mediterranean World and former director of the Albright Institute of Archaeological Research in Jerusalem. He earned his PhD in 2007 from Pennsylvania State University in History and Archaeology of Egypt and the Near East. His research interests are temporarily broad, focused on the Eastern Mediterranean. As director of the Jezreel Valley Regional Project, his archaeological and historical research focuses on the extensive landscape of that region, through time and includes excavation at the Bronze and Iron Age Megiddo, Roman and Byzantine Legio Maximianpolis, and Islamic Lajun. So, Matt, the floor is yours.
Okay, great. I assume you can hear me. This is a tough one because, as you'll see, the Jezreel Valley is not very well known in this period, and I'm hopefully explain to you some reasons why that might be. But in any case, I'm not going to be able to give you such a comprehensive overview as Alex has just given, because it's simply the material doesn't exist. A few notes on the geography and some historical sources. I know I was asked to focus on the archaeology, but I think there are some terminological issues and historiographical issues that we have to keep in mind as we start to look at the archaeological material. For the most part, Josephus is the only textual source for anything going on in the Jezreel Valley during the Hellenistic period. There are a couple of other sources as well, but the main one is going to be Josephus. It is from him and some of the other sources that we get this term Megapodion, which is used for the Jezreel Valley. It also shows up in a couple of other sources, including the Book of Maccabees. This is almost always taken to be a reference to the Jezreel Valley. However, when you look very closely at all of the references, it's not so cut and dry. In both Josephus and Maccabees, the term Megapodion can refer to the Jezreel Valley, but can also seems to refer to the Beit Netophah Valley, in some cases referring to the Upper Jordan Valley around Beit Shan, and arguably in at least one case, I think the term is being used for the plain of Akko. So in doing the historiographical research on the Jezreel Valley for this period, I've been very careful to try to consider each of these references in turn and take this Great Plain not as a proper noun for the entire Jezreel Valley, but basically a less proper noun. So for example, when we are reading the reproduction of Julius Caesar's declarations of the returning of the villages in the Great Plain, Megapodion, which Hyrcanus and his forefathers possessed, one has to be very careful with what exactly is being referred to. I think in general, the Jezreel Valley has been assumed, but I'm a little skeptical that that is something to be taken so specifically. On the other hand, I think there is a reference to the Jezreel Valley, or at least the parts that we may be interested in from an archaeological point of view, that is not often considered. And that is the use of the term Carmel in both Josephus and Maccabees, and in fact, in other biblical texts. It's often overlooked as a possible reference to places of interest for this discussion. For example, in Joshua, we find the town of Yokneam referred to in this way, the king of Yokneam of Carmel. In the book of Judith, as for the cities of the Carmel and the Gilead and the Upper Galilee and the large valley of Jezreel. So there seems to be a distinction between Carmel and the Jezreel Valley. But what about Yokneam from this Joshua passage? Again, in Josephus's description of the Galilee in War of the Jews, he is describing Galilee with its two divisions known as Upper and Lower Galilee, enveloped by Phoenicia and Syria. Its western frontiers are the outlying territory of Ptolemais and Carmel. I don't think he's referring literally to the mountain of Carmel, but to a geopolitical entity of some sort, administrative entity. A mountain once belonging to Galilee and now to Tyre. Adjacent to Carmel is Gaba, where elsewhere it is referred to as being in the Jezreel Valley, and or Gaba of the Carmel. Some people will argue those are two different places, but I suspect they're one and the same. To this commentary, I want to add two general examples that argue in favor of, at least for some amount of time in the ancient past, that the Carmel as a whole is considered along with several of the towns along the western border of the Jezreel Valley. For example, in early Islamic and later sources, the Bilad al-Ruha, which is generally, you can see my arrow, can't you? Moving around on the screen. Okay. The Balad el Ruha is generally equated with the Ramat Menashe, which includes part of the Carmel here, but it also is a term that includes the coast and parts of the Jezreel Valley as well. I'll show you some examples coming up in a moment. And the tribe of Manasseh is in the tribal allotments and descriptions is also part of the hill country here. But interestingly enough, all of these towns along the western border of the Jezreel are part of the tribe of Manasseh, Megiddo, Yokneam, etc., as well as... talking to me, I guess. As well as some of the places on the coast, possibly Dor and other parts of the Carmel. So just to show you that in three select examples here, on the right-hand side, you're looking at a map of the Turabe dynasty from the 16th and 17th centuries. This is a dynasty that ruled this region directly from Lajun, which is basically modern Megiddo. And their territory also included the entirety of this hill country and only the western margins of the Jezreel Valley itself, all the way to the coast. Somewhat later, there is another entity that grows up at El Fahim, which is here on this map. Megiddo is located right here. This is you're looking at the distribution of towns that are under the control of this polity, and they also include all the hill country and just the western fringes of the Jezreel Valley. And then finally, the aforementioned tribal allotment. This is not a great map, but just to give you an idea, the western half of Manasseh includes the hill country that we've just been talking about to the coast, and it really stops with the western fringes of the Jezreel Valley. So why do I go through all of that? I think that the concept of the Jezreel Valley, as we might think of it today, doesn't really help us in any way when we're dealing with these historical sources. Instead, the concepts of the Carmel on one hand, referring to the mountains and the western part of the Jezreel Valley, and Galilee, Lower Galilee in particular, referring to, of course, Lower Galilee, plus some of the towns that we would expect on the eastern side of the Jezreel Valley, particularly in the area of Dabaria, Tabor, which we'll come to shortly. So I hypothesize that we should see these perceptions of ancient geography correlated to the archaeological evidence. This is something I've been thinking about for a long time, and just as one example that came to me very early was the distribution of types and materials of early Bronze Age 1 pottery. If you compare material from Megiddo, it is much more similar to other EV1 sites in the red area that I've marked than it is to those in blue, which are more akin to pottery types and materials produced at Tel Be'irach, for example. So I think this is a long-term distinction that we've kind of overlooked when we're looking at the Jezreel Valley as a single entity, as opposed to something that's much more divided up. Incidentally, I won't go into this in great detail now, but I think the term Esdraelon, or the Valley of Jezreel, in some of the more ancient sources, in particular, some of the early Christian sources and travelers' narrative, is probably restricted to just the southern part of what we call the Jezreel Valley today. And for those of you who have spent some time in the area, you may realize that there is a large ridge which extends out of the hills here halfway into the valley, which really obscures views from the northern part versus the southern part of the valley and the eastern part. So I think we're dealing with the intersection of three units as opposed to a unit of itself. So with this in mind, let's take a look at a couple of historical points. The conquest of Hyrcanus, for example, he takes Scythopolis, acquiring, according to Josephus, the whole country south of Mount Carmel. Now, I'm going to assume that this Carmel is now referring to this larger entity that I'm talking about here. And so much of the northern part of the Jezreel, or the western part of the Jezreel, depending how you orient yourself in this diagonal place, is probably not to be included in those territories. In looking at Alexander Janaeus and some of the, why do I have this here? Clearly, Janaeus is somehow connected with Galilee already by his reign. He is possibly raised at Ginosar on the Sea of Galilee. We hear of Ptolemy's attacks coming from Ptolemaeus into Shaheen and Sepphoris, so obviously not connected to this part at all. But these are implied in Josephus's text to be towns that are already in Hasmonean or at least Jewish hands at that point in time. In the summary of the conquests of Janaeus from Antiquities, we are told that Strato's Tower was taken. That's of course down here in Caesarea area, so also kind of south and out of the Carmel area. But in the description of the towns near Samaria, Mount Carmel is noted, and I would assume that that's a reference not to just the tip of the mountain here, but this entire area. Mount Tabor, which again, like Mount Carmel, I think is more of a designation of a larger place than it is specifically the mountain. And I would suggest that Dabaria and Hisloth are also part of Tabor, and of course Scythopolis here. Synkelus has a slightly different description in his summary, though it's based on antiquities. Presumably, he mentions Beit Shan, Mali of Samaria, which I don't know what it is. He mentions Mount Tabor. He is missing Carmel, but he does mention Gaba, and this is kind of interesting because presumably, we'll also come back to this again later, Gaba is a town located here on the western fringe of the valley. Could the substitution of Gaba for Carmel be connected to some of these geographical issues I've brought up earlier? Okay, so turning now to the archaeology of the area. This is going to be probably the most boring thing that you're about to hear, and that's not just because it's archaeology, though I think that's exciting, but because we really don't have a lot of material. There have not been a lot of excavations, certainly not big excavations like the ones that Alex has been talking about. We have archaeological surveys. Most of them, in all honesty, are not, I don't even know what to say the word, not comprehensive. You know, most of the archaeological survey of Israel material that was done in the Jezreel Valley was done by Abner Rabban, who was great at many things, but his surveys were basically going out with his grandkids and on the weekends and picking up sherds. These are not comprehensive surveys, though they are presented as such in the archaeological survey reports. These also include the survey of Finkelstein et al. At the beginning of the Megiddo Expedition Project, which was self-declared not interested in anything after the Iron Age. So we don't get a lot of data from there, though they do compile information from some of the other sources and so forth. So here is my summary of all of these archaeological surveys and what we can kind of get out of them, and it's not much. We see general continuity from the Iron Age to the Persian period. It's an increase in the number of sites, but the sites tend to be smaller. So this, to me, seems to be the beginning of a new settlement pattern in the Jezreel Valley that really starts right at this moment in the Persian Hellenistic period transition. These small sites that we can find all over the Jezreel Valley, there are dozens and dozens of them, all have the same profile from surveys: Hellenistic, Roman, early Islamic, all of those periods represented at all of these tiny sites, as opposed to earlier periods when you do have the bigger settlements like Megiddo, Yokneam, Shimron, and so forth. Unfortunately, what that means is, most of this Hellenistic material is at the very bottom of a bunch of very tiny sites that nobody has ever been interested in. So there's already a skew in the data here, and most of the Hellenistic material is only coming from these surface sherd surveys. Both textually and archaeologically, there's no obvious sign of an autonomous city. Gaba Tel Abu Shusha is a possible exception, but we're still on the early side. It's only in the later Hellenistic and early Roman period that Gaba really emerges as an independent city. We don't know what the nature of it was during the Hellenistic period. In terms of the actual material culture that's coming from these surveys, and again, we're usually talking about very small sherds from surfaces. There are a couple inclinations that we can see in this material. There seems to be ties to the coast. There's cosmopolitan and foreign character of the population, again, based on pottery primarily. For example, a large number of wine flasks imported from Rhodes and the Aegean come out of these surveys. Imported Greek and other vessels are also found in some of these assemblages. There are no known fortifications except the watchtower at Yokneam. I don't know why I decided to put that in this archaeological survey section, because that obviously depends on excavation. There's kind of an exception to some of these rules in what we would call the eastern or northeastern Jezreel Valley near Mount Tabor. Dabaria does show a floret in the Hellenistic period. There are abundance of Hellenistic finds, both in survey and in salvage excavations that we'll see a little bit later. It does have the largest assemblage of Rhodian stamped handles in the region, for example. Nearby, of course, Xaloth, excuse me, which does come with some historical pedigree from Josephus and also some surveys and excavations. So this part of the valley, whether or not our ancient friends consider this part of the Jezreel Valley, has some different activity that is more like what is going on in other parts of Galilee. Meanwhile, and I haven't included sites in the Carmel, despite I've made this argument that we should as part of this survey, but it's a work in progress. I would just note that there are a lot of sites in the hill country of Carmel with Hellenistic material and from surveys and excavations. And that material is also connected with some actual building remains. So the story there does seem to be a little bit different. And I'll be very interested to see how this all plays out in future. Okay, I'm going to do a quick run. I have about 10 slides or so with a lot of text and no very interesting pictures for salvage excavations. And I'm not even going to read it all. I just want to make the point through showing these that there are salvage excavations. They often report at the sites I'm going to show you Hellenistic material, but two points about it. One, it is rarely broken up chronologically, early Hellenistic, later Hellenistic, 3rd, 2nd century. We get almost no information about that. And second, in almost all cases, it's Hellenistic pottery in fills of other periods, so not associated with building remains at all. So take what you want from that. It's a hopeful situation for future excavations, but just watch and see. And these are, I also did not take the time to organize these geographically, but I'll tell you more or less where they are. Tel Kashish in the north, reports of pottery and coins with no architectural remains. The coins range from Sidon issue through Ptolemy IV, Kiryat Ata, which Alex knows well. Also in the same vicinity, I'll just kind of put my cursor more or less where these places are. Hellenistic pottery from salvage excavations, Hellenistic bowl. I mean, this is the kind of material we're dealing with here. These very tiny sherds that are, I assume some of you with more expertise can say more about them, but I'm unable to do that. In Afula, we have potsherds of the late Hellenistic period, whatever that means. We have one Hellenistic attic fragment. In Kafr Kana, missing a letter there. In this area, we have a Hellenistic jar, some other things, Hellenistic remains, by that primarily referring to pottery. I should also add at this point, these are most of the examples I'm giving here, the quick references to the Hadashot reports. Some of these were further published in Atikot. and do have a little bit more detail, but not much. Horvat Kana, also in the upper regions over here, Taibe, which is down in the Gilboa, and Horvat Adashim, which is back up in the north, not far from Tel Shimron, all with just very vague references to Hellenistic pottery. Iksal and Kiryat Tivon over here, all pottery remains in later fills. The same with Horvat Zelef, Tamra, which is a little bit farther away, probably more Galilean anyway. Few potsherds and some glass. Nazareth, Salim, which is they're opposite each other in the valley here. Just small bits coming out of these salvage excavations. Ramat Yishai, even Tel Shimron, which we are all hopeful will have material from this period before long in the current excavations. The salvage excavations and surveys do not reveal a lot of material. Sulam, which is over in this area beyond Afula, also small sherds. This is the bulk of our evidence for this period from an archaeological point of view, which is why I don't have a lot of detail. Now, there are some exceptions, and the exceptions come primarily once you get out of the Jezreel Valley or outside of the core area. At Einish Tori, we're way down close to Beit Shan now, which has quite a lot of Hellenistic material in and around the site. At other sites nearby, this large building was found. I mean, once you start to get close to Beit Shan, you start to get a material evidence again. Bet Sharim, I don't know if Adi is with us today or not, but maybe she could say something more about it. As far as I understand, the published material has not reached Hellenistic material stratigraphically, but has come across sherds and other material from the period. But this is another site that we expect something to come out of at some point in time. Josephus refers to it on the border of Ptolemais. There's the implication that the wording is not exactly clear about this in life, that Bernike use it as an administrative center for collecting agricultural produce in the area, and that was the situation going farther back in time. Okay, this is going longer than I meant, but let's jump into a few examples that are a little bit more illustrative of Hellenistic material, and we can be just as quick with these because they're also relatively small. These are places that actually have some building remains of some sort, which are connected to Hellenistic material. Tel Kiri, which is a very tiny settlement near Yokneam in this area here. Pottery, 3rd to early 1st century, with an emphasis on the later page, and 2 3rd century coins are known from there. There's a building that's identified as public because of its robust walls, but no clear plan. Tel Kedesh in the Jezreel Valley, not far from Megiddo down here. Stratum 3, there are building remains, but this hasn't been published other than cursorily either, but there is apparently Persian to early Hellenistic continuous material there. Yokneam in Area A on the north side of the Tel, Stratum 7, a tower was excavated there, or the base of a tower and some sort of wall connected to it, plus abundant pottery in later fills. Ventor and Avisar have suggested a 2nd to early 1st century date for some of that material. A small excavation at Yokneam Elite also produced some Hellenistic material, but I think it has all potsherds as well. Here's another example of an exception. Once you start to get out of the valley proper, you get to Sha'ar Hamakim in the north on the Akko Plain. I wouldn't consider this part of the Jezreel Valley, but it does show where things start to change. Significant Hellenistic site. Siegel thought it was Gaba, but we'll come back to that in just a moment. There's a tower and a water system that seemed to fall into disuse in the early 1st century. I assume that this would probably be a Seleucid establishment, part of Greater Akko. Good. Tel Abu Shusha is another sort of exception. There are new excavations going on here by Abner Ecker and his team. They have not reached Hellenistic levels yet, but they are producing, the cell has produced Hellenistic pottery. I can't remember. Andrea is with us. She has seen some of this pottery. Maybe she can comment at some point if that's early or late, or if it fits into the time period that we're talking about. And finally, two more points. Daburia, this is another exception. Once again, starting to get out of the valley, closer to the Tabor side here, we have pretty good material from the Hellenistic period, from salvage excavations, unfortunately. So it's small, but it's a lot more material. And as we said earlier, this region seems to be archaeologically and historically producing more Hellenistic material. Okay, and I will finish up with just a couple of comments on the southwestern Jezreel, especially in the area of Megiddo and Leggio, primarily through the extensive surveys and salvage excavations of Yotam Tepper. He has identified a lot more Hellenistic material, especially in his surveys. Road 66 is slated, or is already in the process of being souped up, and Yotam took on the pre-road construction survey of this area. And what he more or less noted, don't have that map here, is that along this corridor on this side of the valley, there's a lot more Hellenistic material coming out of intensive surveys than would be expected. And in his maps, which I'm not showing you here, of this Hellenistic material, he shows it extensive swaths near known smaller tells, Abu Shusha, Zarik, Yokneam, and even Megiddo, which we'll come to in a minute, and Tel Bar, where it looks like with a little bit more extensive excavation, we might see perhaps significant Hellenistic settlements. Again, that's primarily through surveys. In the Megiddo area, just skipping a couple of these things, Hellenistic material is coming out of surveys and salvage excavations. Most importantly, at the moment, the only stratified Hellenistic material that we have is from a very small excavation, these two squares here, right in the middle of Kibbutz Megiddo here, which Yotam excavated some time ago. He reached what he calls stratum 8, dating to the Hellenistic period. He has some piece of a wall and in situ Hellenistic material. According to him, personal communication, this is 2nd century material. But even within the excavation of these two squares, he had only reached that depth in a small 2 meter by 2 meter section. But that is somewhat optimistic for finding a Hellenistic settlement in this area, which frankly is the only period not represented in what I call Greater Megiddo. Otherwise, everything from the Neolithic to the Ottoman period, we have stratified remains of. So Hellenistic material's got to be there. What it will tell us about these questions, I don't know. So let me summarize with a couple of points. Hellenistic pottery clearly shows up in the valley. When we encounter it in published reports, we don't get any better chronological resolution than that. It is also reported, interestingly, I think, at these small sites which dot the valley, which continue to be occupied into through the next millennium, basically, as though the Hellenistic period is the initiation of a brand new settlement pattern for the Jezreel Valley that continues up to, I don't know, the early Islamic, maybe medieval period. And finally, the lack of Hellenistic material on a grander scale in the Jezreel Valley is, I think, to be contrasted with all of the areas around it, where we do see quite intensive Hellenistic remains at Beit Shan in the southeast, Sha'ar Emek to the north, Daburia in the east, the sites in the Beit Netufa Valley, and the coastal sites to the west. Does the evidence affirm, modify, or undermine those of the Hasmonean narrative conquest of the Jezreel Valley, as Rui has asked us to address, I have no idea at this point. I think the problem is with the evidence so far. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Matt. Okay, let's
Put
open.
it on gallery.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. Okay, we'll start with Gerald, because he was very eager to ask some questions to Alex. Gerald?
You're on mute.
You're mute.
Okay. Hi, everybody. Well, each time something was smelling Antiochus VII, I wrote just for me, actually, not to intrude. The only thing I have to ask is, what was the site, Alexander, you presented with this wall of mud bricks? What's the name of the site?
Ashdod Yam.
Ah, okay, good. Okay. Yeah. So, in short, everywhere there is a presence of Antiochus VII, and with stamps, not only Rhodian, but stamped of his own administration. And well, I wrote an article on that, so you just have to look at it. And I have nothing new than what I wrote, except for Gezer, which is not on the coast, but where I realized that we have scale weights, which is dated, and I hesitated between the 40s and the 30s, 140s, 130s, and actually it is definitely dated in time of the occupation of Antiochus VII. So, and last thing, I'm very interested by all the amphoras, imported amphoras that you found, because we may refine. There are types which are together, and that is meaningful for the dating. I'm talking about amphoras, not only stamps. I mean, really remains and toes, bases with toes are very, very important too, generally speaking. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Gerald. So you don't have a question, it's only comments, right?
Yeah.
I had one question. What was the name of the site with the mud brick wall? No, I think it's clear enough. I mean, the way you showed each time I reacted, it was something either known or new. For example, the arrowhead with the monogram. Donald has seen it, of course. I hope. Donald Ariel.
Yeah.
Of course. So.
Yeah. So Gerald, first of all, thank you very much, and of course I am familiar with your. I think that what you have mentioned is your article about Antiochus VII's invasion and occupation of Coele, Syria, and Judea, right? That's the article. Yeah, so we cite it, of course, extensively in our publication, and there is no doubt, I think, at the moment that Antiochus VII was extremely active there. All around the area of Yavne Yam and the Ashdod Yam, and it's not only stamps, it's also coins. Out of several hundreds of Hellenistic coins that we have in Ashdod Yam, identified by Yaniv Shower. I worked with Yaniv on this, and the issues of Antiochus VII, they present the biggest amount, actually, out of the royal Seleucid coins, yeah? And of course, this arrowhead with the monogram, epsilon beta monogram. Yeah, it all goes together very well with the very active involvement in this area, which is not surprising if you consider historical sources.
Mhm. And I don't know if it has been confirmed by what other things, but he went as far as Beersheba. So, of course, Ashkelon was important also as an harbor, but I don't think it was really very long. Well, the coins show this, I guess, but it was a very long occupation, actually. It's only before.
Thank you, Gerald. Let's move on
Before
to
he left
the next
siege of
question.
Jerusalem. So
Debbie?
it's not so many years.
Yes.
After that.
Hi. Hi, Alex. I really enjoyed your lecture and I learned a lot. So if I understand correctly, in Ashdod, in Ashkelon, and in Yafo, there is a continuation between the Seleucid to the Hasmonean period.
Yes.
Can you expand a little? Is there is the occupation changed? It changed from monumental buildings to smaller occupation or to larger occupation?
Very difficult to say. I'm not the excavator. I read the entire Ashkelon's report recently, Hellenistic, well, not every page of it, yes, but selectively. And it's, you know, the state of preservation is not that good. So you see the continuity in terms of coins, material culture, but it's very difficult to say anything about city planning, etc., etc. The same holds true for Jaffa. Also in Ashdod, Jaffa, again, as I said during my presentation, anyone who excavated the Jaffa knows that that's a disaster. It's very difficult to find the proper archaeological, undisturbed archaeological layer there. The destruction is all around, disturbing, etc. And the same in Ashdod, also very limited extent of excavations for Hellenistic period in particular. So again, judging from what was published by Dotan, there is a continuity, at least as I can see it. In Jaffa, there is obvious continuity. This I excavated on my own, and in Ashkelon, I take the words of the excavators and I see the material culture. They say it continues into the 1st century. But it's Deborah, it's very difficult to answer your question about the change of the city plan, and I really don't have an answer for that, unfortunately.
It could have been very interesting because all the satellite sites seems to be abandoned and you could expect to see them concentrated in these sites that are continuing.
I agree, but again, we are talking about really big sites. Ashkelon, Ashdod, these are huge tells. So it is there is a good possibility that in unexcavated parts of these huge mounds, you will find what you're looking for. But for this, somebody has to excavate there. And it's not, and if everything I've presented for Ashdod Yam, for example, from Hellenistic point of view, it was completely out of my original plan. I went there because Joseph Kaplan reported in the 60s when he excavated, that he made his first trial excavation in Ashdod Yam, he reported only the remains of the 7th century BC. Late 8th, early 7th century BC, and that's what I wanted. But fortunately or unfortunately, in addition to these remains, we also found the 2nd century remains, which are extremely interesting, but that was not my original intention to excavate them. So it was, and that was a bit problematic in a way, because when you encounter a monumental fortress like I showed you just part of this fortress, we stopped after one season because it would demand a very serious excavations for several seasons on behalf of someone who is interested in the pure 2nd century BC site that was established in the early 2nd century and destroyed in the late 2nd century. Unfortunately, I couldn't find anyone who would be interested to excavate it. And I offered to several people. I said, "You won't come and dig, yeah? It's very difficult, as you know. So it's also, yeah, we have to wait for somebody. Maybe out of this group, somebody will pick up the challenge."
Thank you.
Hopefully. Thank you. We have a question in the room from Andrea, and then we are moving to Ayala. Do you want to come?
Hi. Hi, everybody. Alex and Matt, thank you so much. This is so fascinating. I have a million questions. I have two sides of I will be writing you, but I would like to play devil's advocate for a minute and ask both of you a kind of combination question. So there is an interesting pattern of, as Debbie was just pointing out, some big sites on the coast, a few big sites continue, lots of satellite sites end. Matt, you talked about in the early 1st century, a number of sites, it sounds like occupation ends at those. I wonder about the War of the Scepters. So there is this sort of reflexive desire or whatever inclination to associate late 2nd century cessation of occupation with the Hasmoneans. But there were other parties interested in this region. And if the Hasmoneans were so interested in the coast, how come they don't continue living at and using any of these port cities? And there's, Alex, as you pointed out, every 20 kilometers, every 10 nautical miles, you have a port because you need them if you use the ports. If you don't use the ports, of course, then you don't need them. So could it be that this pattern of late 2nd century abandonments at so many places in the coast have nothing to do with the Hasmoneans and everything to do with the Ptolemies, for example, and whatever remnant of the Seleucids is here? And lastly, in terms of continuity of occupation at the few big sites and who is there, if, for example, Eastern Sigillata A continues at Ashdod, at Jaffa, it's less likely, I would argue, that the people who are living there are Hasmonean. In which case, the continuity of occupation at these couple of big sites would suggest a very different geopolitical and basic economic understanding of the exact same archaeological phenomena that the both of you have presented. So as a devil's advocate, I offer that to you, and I'm interested in your response.
You want to start, Matt?
No. I have no idea. That was the whole point of my talk, is that I don't know anything. Yeah, so Alex, it's on you.
Okay, Andrea, thank you for this question. I have to say that I find myself actually very much in agreement with you in spirit. And I approach this from different perspective because, as you know, my main area is Iron Age, not Hellenistic. And in Iron Age archaeology, for instance, I always, and I published about this not once, not twice, that I always against these reconstructions that take, for instance, the 701 BC Sennacherib's destruction and 46 Judean, fortified Judean cities, and any bloody city in Shephelah, it is always connected to, or village to Sennacherib, yeah? I was always against this because it is clearly an ideological message, like you don't have in Judah 46 to 45 towns during Sennacherib's campaign. And also in terms of demography and demographical trends, I always show my students, for example, these charts based on surveys of Yehuda Dagan and many others, very good surveys, but you see this very strange peak of settlement activity and hundreds of thousands of people in the Shfilah in the late 8th century, and suddenly everything drops. You cannot explain how come in a matter of just a couple of generations they produce so many kids, and how come everything drops down. So it's obviously not every site was destroyed by Sennacherib, and taking this, I'm going back to your question to Hellenistic because it's actually the same spirit. So I agree with you in principle that maybe we are very much or too much, not all of us, but myself included, yes, influenced by this dictatorship of historical sources. So it's very easy. It's very easy once you have it chronologically, it fits more or less. Oh, look, it's in Maccabees, it fits very well. And the thing is, though, if you recall that during my presentation in the final slide, I've emphasized so far, for example, with regard to Ashdod Yam, so far, only on the Acropolis. So the military establishment, and I think that we excavated by chance, it was the military establishment, it was indeed destroyed. And I think that Hasmoneans are good candidates, but it does not dismiss a possibility of continuity just 500 meters beyond the perimeter of the so-called Acropolis, etc. It's a huge settlement. So I really agree with you, actually, that because of this 20 kilometers rule that you really need it for safe seafaring activity, there should be a settlement there. It's simply beneath the sand. Now, in terms of Ptolemaic hostilities, you're talking about 2nd century, of course, right?
I am, although, can I just say very quickly, and
sure,
I don't want to take a lot of time, only because I know Ayala has a question, Noah, I see you have your hand raised. Just to say, there's plenty of evidence that the Ptolemies and the Seleucids had a lot of interest in these sites. We have all the evidence of Antiochus VII, and prior to that, and just very quickly, that inscribed arrowhead, the Beta Epsilon arrowhead. Now there's a more recent study by Béranger Renan in Basor. These are Ptolemy V. These are 100 years earlier than the earlier ascription, or 80 years earlier. And all of that is just to say, we have plenty of evidence that there was wider imperial interest in these coastal ports, and pretty much no evidence other than assertions every so often in later historical sources that the Hasmoneans cared at all about these ports. We have no evidence that they care, and they don't occupy them, and they don't use them, and they don't get imported goods through them. So just as a default, I would think that the burden of proof is the opposite. The burden of proof is what makes us so sure it's the Hasmoneans attacking these sites.
It's again, it's, as I said, it's us being enslaved by historical sources. For no doubt about that, no doubt. So once I see that Sylvie is here. Once the historical sources are being criticized heavily, archaeologists have to think twice before they offer such an elaborate reconstruction, like, okay, this is this Hasmonean ruler, that's another. late in the reign of John Hyrcanus. Yeah, of course, once you take this as a propaganda and not necessarily as a historical source, of course, the picture is different. So this is something to think about. I agree with you completely. And again, it's always good to stay in the field where someone understands more. So I understand more in the Iron Age, and I freely admit it. Yeah, I'm here as an external observer. I like Hellenistic period. I have nothing against the Hellenistic period, but Iron Age is my favorite period. And again, using this longue durée approach, it's exactly the same thing in the 7th century, let's say post-Sennacherib. It is often noticed by several scholars like Axel Knauf, for example, Daniel Kahn in Haifa, and myself included, and others, that there are unnoticed Egyptian campaigns that probably took place in the 7th century BC during the days of the Nubian 25th dynasty, before the expansion of the Saitic 26th dynasty. And on many cases, we are under this fallacy of describing a lot of destruction layers in the southern part of the country in particular to Sennacherib, while in the reality, many of them could have been destroyed by Egyptians, actually. And this is, and I say this because it's exactly what you are saying with regard to Ptolemy's and Seleucid power engagement in the 2nd century. So I would really take what you say, not maybe as a final blow to the reconstructions that still put some emphasis on Hasmonean expansion, but I would say that these should be viewed with a grain of salt, and we should be, of course, again, you are more engaged. I'm not comparing myself to you with regard to the knowledge of the sources from this period, but those of us who dare to say anything about this period should be more engaged with critical scholarship about the sources. So no doubt on my part, I agree with you completely.
Thank you very much. I'm going to give this back to Roy because I know there are more questions.
Thank you so much, Andrea and Alex. Ayala, you had a question. Do you want to ask it? You're mute.
Hey, do you hear me?
Yes.
I text to you about the mad brick wall at Yavne Yam. It really interested me, and I want to
Ashdod Yam.
No, Ashdod Yam. Oh, okay. If do you know about parallels in our area, and if do you have an explanation for this choice? I suggested the parallel from Dora Eropus, that there researchers explain that maybe the mud bricks was done because of the siege of the Parthians. So maybe we have explanation like this or something.
In our case, in Ashdod Yam, the Iron Age fortifications, they all built of mud bricks. So we have huge, really huge fortifications walls from the late 8th, 7th century BC, and they are enormous, and they built of mud bricks. Here we see this local continuity. We checked the mud bricks, and the recipe of it is called recipe. Who is here? Rotem. Yeah, you work with Marta Lorenson. So Marta worked a lot with me there, and she's specialist in mud brick architecture. And she tried to designate the recipe of the mud bricks, and the mud bricks look the same. It's just a local construction material although in the Hellenistic period, there is a difference that they add the crushed grog, crushed pottery. They add to the mud bricks, yes, and more shells, and we have more shells. But the rest of the mud bricks, they are the same as in the Iron Age. And what we saw, it was very interesting. We compared mud bricks from Iron Age from Tel Ashdod and the Bronze Age from Tel Ashdod, from Ashdod Yam from Iron Age and Hellenistic period, and from Adalom from Assyrian palace from the 7th century BC. They all look the same. The matrix, it's local Hamra soil, but the recipe of the Assyrian, so-called Assyrian palace is completely different. The amount of sand, the amount of mud, the shape, of course, it's completely different. So there was an Assyrian architect who simply told locals, you do it according to this recipe for the palace. Otherwise, it's very difficult to explain. On the other hand, on Tel Ashdod and at Ashdod Yam, you see this continuity from the Middle Bronze Age all the way to Hellenistic period. They use mud brick architecture without any problem, because that's the main source for building material. What is interesting about this wall, which was located on top of the Iron Age fortifications, is that it stands on pure sand, not on stone foundation. So you have these mud brick walls which are located on sand, on pure sand. And this is very Egyptian feature, if you think about this, very Egyptian feature. So this is, again, back to what Andrea said about Ptolemaic involvement possible. But again, in terms of material culture, we have solely 2nd century BC here. We almost don't have coins. Ptolemy, we have one coin of Ptolemy the 9th, yeah. But it's, again, only one coin, and
they are very rare.
yeah, there are
So
some ideas that he
coin is
tried to
important.
maybe to make a reconquista. I'm not going to embark on this, but it's not so surprising. It's still okay. It is within the framework of this 2nd century BC. So I hope it answers your question, Ayala.
Yes, but that means that שנייה שחר. My side. That you one moment about the question if that Cappadocia it means that the architecture and the people are local and not soldiers or something like that from the north.
The veteran settlement, it was not my idea. It was idea of excavators, of Uziad, and you're talking about Barnea and Gan Soret. The so-called veterans settlements. It was idea of Chaimi and Uziad. Well, they also noticed in I don't remember in Barnea, maybe here people know better than me, or remember better than me, but I think in Gan Sorek I even saw it. They also have mud brick walls on sand, yes, without stone foundations, in several cases at least. So what does it say exactly? Egyptian connection, maybe. Actually, sand is it's okay. It's a very good, you know, if you know how to do it properly, it's a very good amortizator against earthquakes because it gives a flexibility to a structure. It moves with the sand. It does not collapse. So it's not such a stupid idea, actually, to build it right on the sand. The Egyptians knew what they're doing. Yeah. That's all I have to say.
Thank you. We have a question from Noah.
Matt, Alex, thanks. Really enjoyed it. Having seen you guys in your trench over 10 years ago, it's really special. to hear this, and my ears perked up around the what can we know for sure, the ethnic identity of these garrison soldiers. And I thought, Alex, with not just with Ashdod, maybe with these other satellite settlements, but you're slipping in there the idea of Anatolian soldiers, and there's this. My question is about the coin evidence, and if I got it correctly, a little bit of feedback, which I think it's tantalizing and should be pursued. The C-Day coins, yeah, I mean, right? So we're talking about bronze, if I saw, okay, that's important, and it's important to see whether they're countermarked, because there's a wider issue. Obviously, there's a wider issue about the ethnic identity in Hellenistic armies that's very old, but it's been given new life by Christelle Fisher-Beauvais for Ptolemaic. But over here, so there's with the silver, with the flow of silver from Asia Minor and especially Pamphylia, but also the Western Asia Minor, it's this Seleucid Levant. There's actually quite a debate about the forces, whether the trade versus payment to military. But when it comes to specifically Pamphylia, a place like C-Day, yeah, there's this countermarking phenomenon. And Alain Brasson has this article, The Pamphylian Hub from 2018. And you may be able to see there a place for your coin, but that's all been with the silver, actually. I checked, though, for the bronze, and actually one of the in Seleucid coins, volume 2.2, they have an appendix of Seleucid countermarks on foreign bronze coins, and C-Day does show up, and I'm working myself in Antalya, Atalaya, and Pamphylia, where there's the same phenomenon of these Seleucid countermarks on these 2nd century bronzes, which seem to indicate like a favored reception in the Levant. But I just want to say it's tantalizing. Like, it's not nothing to build an argument on. I think it's worth looking at very closely, those coins.
Thank you, Noah. First of all, nice to see you. A long time. And congratulations on your book. And about Atalites, etc. So now, as to your question, they're not countermarked, but we have quite many of C-Day coins, and the same phenomenon was already observed by as I said, I think during the lecture, by Donald Ariel, already for excavations in Gan Sorek. These excavations of Uziad, he also detected there quite a number of coins from C-Day. And in Ashdod Yam, the issue was picked up by Mati Yohananov, and he published a very big article on the Sidetan coinage, and the initial point for it was his EMA. So I was the advisor, but with Chaim Gittler, so it's okay. So somebody who really knew what he's talking about with the numismat. And he published it in a very big article about the Sidetian coinage, and presenting also this, picking up Donald's idea that we are dealing with mercenaries, because the question that I think we should ask, why out of so many cities in Asia Minor, we have this very peculiar presence of bronze coinage. And again, it's a bronze coinage. That's what you've mentioned also. It's very important. And not silver, in particular from C-Day. So the idea of mercenaries who bring some local coins with them, and that's what we find, is actually quite appealing to me. But as you said, it's tantalizing. It's really tantalizing, and it's not easy to answer. But I think that the ethnic the ethnic composition of these mercenaries was probably extremely mixed, really varied from all places in the vast Mediterranean world. And we know this from, it's suffice to mention the famous Gaza inscription of that soldier from Crete, yeah, for example, that fought in the, what was his name? I forgot now. It's early inscription, of course, but he fought in the battle in Crete, and eventually he was buried in Gaza. And we know about intermarriages between different Greeks of different origin that are present on the South Levantine coast. So the very rich ethnic composition would not surprise me at all here.
Thank you. I have a question for you, Matt. First of all, the Jezreel Valley, in my eyes, is very interesting and very pivotal for learning this period. It's for people coming from the mountain. It's a very fertile and very important for the economy, and it's also very important for the transportation for this small kingdom. And I think that, first of all, there are two sites that are, in my eyes, very important for understanding the Jezreel Valley. Both are located in the periphery of the valley. One you mentioned is Sha'ar HaMakim. It's a fortress. It's kind of small fortress. Right on, actually, Sha'ar HaMakim in Hebrew, it's the gate of the valley. It's leading one from the Jezreel Valley to the valley of Akko, to Akko Plain. So I think this site is crucial for understanding the valley itself. And the other site is Chovat Shamot in Beit Shan Valley, where the famous inscription of Hepzibah was uncovered. The inscription is telling and is indicating about rural settlement in this region. So I think both are important. And my question is, do you think that the lack of archaeological evidence is simply due to the problem of the stratigraphy that you mentioned, that the settlements were covered, or it was simply not really settled in that period?
Good question. Yeah, the Hepzibah inscription, you're right, is especially important, but it's really vague what territory is being referred to. And it's very annoying in that sense. Also found, it's on its way down toward Beit Shan, and so might be, I don't know, part of that world rather than the rest of the Jezreel Valley. I don't know, but yeah, I think at this moment in time that the lack of evidence is just lack of larger scale excavations in the right places. I mean, the valley has not really enjoyed big projects before. I mean, Megiddo is obviously one, Yokneam is one, Beit Shearim is one. Everything else is really encountered opportunistically through salvage excavations and that sort of thing. I think the best chance that we have is going to be at Legio. We're doing work not only in the Roman legionary base, but on the Tel, where the Hellenistic material was found. It's buried beneath a lot of later stuff, but that's still exciting. So yeah, I'm optimistic that there will be a lot more evidence and the Hellenistic period will show itself. I just don't know what it's going to look like.
Like colluvial. Yeah, ask him about colluvium.
You have a question, right?
Ask Matt about colluvial buildup in the valley.
What is the question?
Yeah, I get it.
Yeah.
I have a question to Matt too.
Okay, so about the colluvial buildup. Yeah, there's as far as we can date when large deposits of colluvium are being deposited into the valley, there are probably two major broader events, one happening sometime prior to the Bronze Age, which covered a lot of Neolithic and Paleolithic sites. And then sometime later in the post-Roman period, maybe moving on into the Byzantine period, we think there's a large deposition there. However, the problem is with the sites in the center of the valley. All of the sites that we know from around the edge of the valley, and there are tons and tons and tons of them, really, hundreds, especially in the southwestern Jezreel Valley. I don't think that the colluvium is kind of offsetting in an unrealistic way what we otherwise know. I don't think there's like a buried Hellenistic polis right in the middle of the valley, for example.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That's perfect.
Alex, you had a question?
Yes, to Matt, and it's about the nature of this very peculiar region, the modes of governing, I would say. So from what I remember, and here again, the historians can, among us, they can fix me if I'm wrong, but from what I remember, from what I've learned many years ago, is that the Hephzibah inscription and the Zeno papyri, of course, they present a picture, they usually taken as presenting a picture of Jezreel Valley as a region which possesses royal agricultural estates. So which is, in a way, would be a continuity from the Iron Age, yes? So if it's so, and we don't have, maybe they will be found, but at the moment we don't have these huge agricultural fortified estates like the Khurvat Tevet excavated by Omer Sergei, by chance also during the salvage excavations. But if we don't have something like this, and we have this continuity of royal property, also during the Ptolemaic, Persian, Ptolemaic, and Seleucid period, maybe what we have here is the different pattern of dealing with these estates. So the authority figure is sitting far away, but all these little sites, little villages, they just work on the lands that belong to the king. And what do you think about this possibility?
I think it's certainly a possibility. The historical and the textual evidence is also very vague and really depends on kind of reading several statements from Josephus, for example, or especially from Josephus, and kind of interpreting them against one another. It's not really said that that's how the valley is settled by anyone. And as I said, with the Hephzibah inscription, the lands that this whatever his name is, the guy is allowed to keep control of. Thank you. Whatever these lands are not specific, nor is their size clear. It's sort of a leap from Josephus back to these texts that, it must be an entire royal establishment, king's land across the entire valley, because of course, from our point of view, it's very, it is very agriculturally productive, and it was then as well, but probably extremely less so. I mean, that entire center of the valley, even in the summer before 1900, was totally unusable. I mean, it's really just the margins of the land, the margins of the valley that are producing things. And by the way, it's that inhospitability of the center of the valley that I think leads into the geographic things that I was talking about before, that make it as a natural barrier separating these 3-4 entities anyway. So yeah, sir, possible. But
thank you. Debbie, you have a question?
No, it's just a continuation to this discussion between Matt and Alex. So I would have expected not to find a big fortresses or big cities you have in the valley. If they are agricultural lands, so very, very possibly you have the occupation on the mounds, like in Yokneam or in Megiddo. And of course, the area of the Jordan Valley shows a complete different.
Right.
pattern. So I think what I would expect is to find some small farms or in the area of the valley. So just it's a follow-up of the idea. I like the idea.
That would be my guess based on this change in settlement pattern that I was referring to that seems to start right about now. Yeah, the point is, I think that we just don't really know. There's so much missing. It's terra incognita for this period.
Okay.
So
Thank
what
you.
people from the early Bronze Age have to say, if we don't know too much with all the sources that we have here?
It's funny because archaeologically speaking, the early Bronze Age is far better known across the whole valley, especially the EB1.
That's why I've said it. But
Yeah.
without historical sources.
Yeah, it's great. They've lived everywhere.
Thank you so much, everybody. We will meet again in April 3rd, and
And we're going to continue the regional.
we will continue to talk about the regions that were discussed previously. So stay tuned. We will send information soon. Bye-bye.
Organizing.
Thank you,
Great.
Deb. Thank you, Alex.
Sure.
Thank everybody. Thank Rui. Thank
Thank you.
Andrea. Thank everybody for
Bye,
joining.
good evening. Good.
Bye bye.
Erev Tov.